Earlier today, some roundtable interviews were released regarding The Mandalorian Season 3, which begins tomorrow. I'll link to our friends over at Sky Talkers podcast if you want to listen to the full hour of discussion with Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, Rick Famuyiwa, and Katie Sackhoff. But I want to focus on something Jon Favreau said, because he may have finally revealed more about the timeline of The Mandalorian and the surrounding series. In talking about Grogu, he says, "We know that he's been rescued and spent many years with The Mandalorian, went back with Luke, now we've spent 2 years apart from him there training." So, a couple things here. First, it sounds like he definitely has confirmed that the first 2 seasons of the series and the Book of Boba Fett have taken place over the course of several years. He just says many years. That's vague enough to be nailed down in a reference book at a later date, but people have been asking me since the series began what the time frame is, and the simple answer was always that I didn't know. Long enough for Din and Grogu to form a close bond. The show moves at a fast pace, so it all felt like it could have been over the course of a few months, but knowing it was years works too. After all, Navarro gets quite the glow up over the course of all 3 seasons. But the bigger bombshell to me is that Grogu may have spent 2 years with Luke. I say may have because I think there's a chance Favreau may not have meant exactly that. He could have meant that there have been about 2 actual years in between the end of The Mandalorian Season 2 and the start of Season 3. Like, the audience has been mostly apart from Grogu for that long. I'm just saying, Jon is answering questions in an interview. He is not reading from a prepared statement and telling us all to go update Wikipedia. Interviews are not canon. That said, I'm gonna operate under the assumption that he is accurate. For the sake of Din and Grogu, I like that they spent that long apart. That adds so much more weight to Luke taking the child away. When we see Din as a bounty hunter again, knowing he's been doing that for years means more. The fact that he misses Grogu and wants to go see him and then decides not to, all of that means more. On paper, I think it works great. What frustrates me is that none of that plays on screen. None of it was clear in the Book of Boba Fett. The emotional weight doesn't land because to the audience, it all happened so fast. Like I said, I like that they spent years apart, but I would have rather seen that. I would have rather spent a season or so with Din struggling with his identity without Grogu. Spend some of that time with Grogu struggling with his own path. I'm not saying we needed to do that for 2 seasons, but I think it would have worked better if they had been apart on screen for more than just 2 episodes. The last few episodes of the Book of Boba Fett seems like it's what Season 3 should have been. Technically, I got to see everything I wanted to, we just zipped through the story beats incredibly fast. I also think this makes Boba Fett's present-day story in the Book of Boba Fett seem a little off. I would never have guessed that story took place over the course of 2 years. But honestly, that stuff doesn't bother me as much. As someone who writes a complete canon timeline every year, making every piece of the Star Wars puzzle fit together neatly is difficult. The more you analyze The Empire Strikes Back, for example, the more you realize the timeline is kind of a mess. That's why, after the fact, they had to say that planets like Dagobah that are strong in the Force can deal with time differently. Similar to Mortis, where Anakin and Ahsoka and Obi-Wan go to the mystical realm, go on a whole big adventure, and when they come back, no time has passed. Literally last night, I happened to read a relevant quote from the book Mythos by Stephen Fry. It's probably best for us not to concentrate in too literal a fashion on the temporal structure of myth. He's talking about the conflicting timelines of Greek mythology, but I think it can still apply to Star Wars. So maybe Grogu experienced what seemed like 2 years to him training with Luke on Ossus, while Boba Fett and Din went about their lives for a few months. Whatever, the actual timeline doesn't matter so much to me as getting to see the story beats play out. Like I said, the first 2 seasons could have taken years or months or weeks. It's irrelevant as long as we believe the bond between Din and Grogu. Unfortunately, I don't think their time apart held the same level of emotional weight. Weeks or months or years separated from one another, it didn't feel as big and impactful as I think it could have. Which is a little frustrating, but I worked through most of that a year ago. I'm still incredibly excited for Season 3 regardless of how quickly Din and Grogu reunited. This is all kind of like when you read a book or a comic that enhances something in a movie. It's like, I kinda wish I got to see that on the screen, but still I'm glad for the additional context. I'm not saying it's perfect storytelling, but I am saying it's been a part of the Star Wars experience since 1977. No matter what the timeline looks like, I'm not going to let it affect the joy I hope tomorrow will bring me, because The Mandalorian does bring a special kind of joy. It's not perfect. We can point at things after the fact and say, oh, I wish they did this better or differently, but I have so much fun watching it every week. I wanted to cover this because I think it actually will make me see Season 3 a little differently, and because I already put out my video on everything you need to know before watching the season premiere yesterday, so it's too late to add this. Check that video out in the cards if you haven't seen it. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to keep up with all our episode reviews and Mandalorian Season 3 coverage starting tomorrow. Follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and consider checking out our Patreon page, where we'll be releasing our video reactions and audio commentaries for every new episode. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.